Welcome to Inside the Resume. Today we talk about Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder, former WBC heavyweight champion of the world with a professional record of 44 fights, 42 victories, 41 knockouts with 1 defeat and 1 draw. So Deontay Wilder, he won an Olympic bronze medal, being eliminated by Clemente Russo of Italy in the Olympic semifinals. He earned bronze in 2008 in Beijing and turned professional the same year. Now, there are a few ways that you usually develop a prospect. One is fast track your prospect in case he had an extended amateur background, won a lot of medals, and simply there's no reason for him to go through the extended journeyman stage. So he gets fast tracked to a world level, eventual world title shot. Obviously, another way is a more measured way where you have your fighter start with the journeyman level, quickly go up to gatekeeper level and see where he exactly fits. Takes him about 10-15 fights to get to the contender level, and then try to get him a world title shot in about 20 fights, which the most world champions have gone through. And obviously there's a third option in which you take a long time to develop your prospect in case he doesn't have an extensive amateur boxing background or lacks boxing background or boxing fundamentals at the time he turns professional, which is what happened with Deontay Wilder. He was not fast tracked at all. He was fighting the same level of competition for about 30 fights. For example, in his 30th fight, he fought a guy, Nikolai Firta. He was about the level of competition that amateur champions and established amateur boxers fight on their professional debut when they turn pro. So, not an impressive road to the title contender level for Deontay Wilder, but after 30 fights, he was barely fighting anybody that was in top 50 at the time. So in his 31st fight, Deontay Wilder had his world title eliminator for the WBC mandatory challenger, at the time the belt held by Bermane Stiverne, who won a vacant belt after beating Chris Arreola after Vitaly Klitschko, the longtime WBC champion, retired. And pretty much everything about this fight was highly controversial. Obviously, Malik Scott, he was not in the top 15 heavyweights at the time. Even by the WBC standards, he was not rated in the top 10. But either way, for some reason, that fight was declared the WBC final eliminator, and the fight itself was very controversial because Malik Scott went down in the first round from the punch from Deontay Wilder that did not land, and a lot of people called foul play, a lot of people called fixed fight, a dive taken by Malik Scott. And also an interesting information that Malik Scott and Deontay Wilder were old friends, and that right now at this moment Malik Scott is a part of Deontay Wilder's team. So either way, it was a KO1 victory for Deontay Wilder. And then in his 32nd fight, he fought a guy named Jason Gavern, a guy who was not rated in top 100 at the time, a guy who had 25 wins, 16 defeats, and 4 draws. Absolutely unacceptable for a fighter that's supposed to fight for a world title in his next fight. Either way, Bermane Stiverne was the fight where Deontay Wilder won his WBC heavyweight championship of the world. He had never fought a top 10, top 15 opponent in his career prior to Bermane Stiverne. Bermane Stiverne, he was top 10 at the time after beating Chris Arreola in a rematch for a vacant title, where he was getting outboxed by Chris Arreola for about 5-6 rounds before managing to stop Arreola. And Bermane Stiverne, he was known for his power, but other than that, he was an overweight boxer, so to speak, a slow, predictable fighter that had no outside game, whose game plan consisted of setting traps, but not anything like David Haye, who was actually a former cruiserweight, very fast, very explosive fighter. Unlike David Haye, Bermane Stiverne was a slow, plodding fighter with no real chance to outbox you, with no real fast hand. But it was really a step-up fight for Wilder. First time he's actually fighting on a world level, and he managed to outbox Bermane Stiverne for 12 rounds, an impressive feat for Deontay Wilder at the time. He became the WBC heavyweight champion of the world, and at the time there were calls for him to fight the undisputed fight against the lineal and unified heavyweight champion of the world, the all-time great Vladimir Klitschko. Deontay Wilder's manager, Shirley Finkel, quickly came out and said that the fight was not going to happen. Wilder was just a baby with a belt. He was not ready. It was not the time to throw him in the fire against Vladimir, an established champion. So Deontay Wilder kind of turned that fight down, and he went on to fight a guy called Eric Molina, a guy who was not in top 10, who was not in top 15. And he had an interesting fight with Eric Molina. I mean, the guy didn't deserve the shot at the first place, but he tried to make the best of his opportunity. He managed to hurt Deontay Wilder throughout the fight, but ultimately Deontay Wilder was able to prevail and knock out Eric Molina in the 9th round. The next fight was Johann Duhaupas. Another unimpressive fight, unimpressive performance by Deontay Wilder. Obviously, he was a prospect with the belt, so to speak. He had a WBC heavyweight belt, but he didn't fight championship opposition. He was fighting a prospect opposition while having the belt. So Johann Duhaupas, another guy who was, for example, defeated by Francesco Pianeta a long time ago, who had no impressive wins on his own, but somehow found his place within WBC's top 15 ratings. Deontay Wilder managed to force a referee stoppage. He was not able to knock down Johann Duhaupas, but he was able to prevail in the fight where he received damage as well. So that was the second defense of Deontay Wilder's title. Next on, he fought Artur Szpilka. Once again, it just shows how unimpressive Wilder's streak of opponents was at the time. So Artur Szpilka, another guy that was not top 10, not top 15, no amateur background. He was really lacking boxing fundamentals himself, and he was much smaller than Deontay Wilder, who was basically cruiserweight. He's shorter than Alexander Usyk, for example, former cruiserweight champion. So Deontay Wilder was actually getting outboxed most of this fight by a shorter guy with no real outside game. He was just able to throw punches and outbox Deontay Wilder on a work rate alone. But Deontay Wilder managed to land that powerful right hand in the 9th round, knocking out Artur Szpilka. And then Deontay Wilder went on to fight Chris Arreola. Yes, the same Chris Arreola that was over the hill when he was knocked out by Bermane Stiverne. The same Chris Arreola, he was fighting Deontay Wilder more than a year later. And Deontay Wilder was able to stop Chris Arreola in 8 rounds. And after that, Deontay Wilder proceeded to make 2 similar title defenses against the same level of opposition. First was Gerald Washington, an undefeated fighter, but once again not a top 15 opposition. So Gerald Washington was able to actually outbox Deontay Wilder for the most of the fight before getting clipped and knocked out in the 5th round. It just confirmed Deontay Wilder's lack of fundamental boxing skills, which allowed him to basically get outboxed by almost any fighter he faced and then land that game-changer right hand and scores a knockout victory. But either way, after that fight, he rematched Bermane Stiverne. Absolutely no reason to do that fight. Bermane Stiverne, he was already defeated in a shutout by Deontay Wilder, and then he fought an unimpressive fight with a journeyman called Derrick Rossi. Deontay Wilder knocked out Bermane Stiverne in the 1st round. And this was around the time when Deontay Wilder was in negotiations to fight Anthony Joshua, the unified champion. It was supposed to be the undisputed unification. It was a really strange negotiations where Deontay Wilder failed to acknowledge that Anthony Joshua was the A side at the time. Anthony Joshua was making $20 million a fight at the time, where Deontay Wilder was making $1.5 million a fight. So Deontay Wilder refused to accept that he was a B side at the time, and thus the fight was not made. He proceeded to fight Luis King Kong Ortiz, which was actually a great fight at the time. Ortiz was undefeated. Ortiz was not somebody that everybody wanted to fight. He was fairly avoided fighter at heavyweight, and Deontay Wilder gave him an opportunity. There was only the second fighter that was in the top 10 at the time Deontay Wilder fought him, so it was actually a big step up for Deontay Wilder. In the fight, he was outboxed for the most of the fight, but once again, Deontay Wilder managed to prevail with his power. He stopped Luis Ortiz in the 10th round, and then he went on to fight Tyson Fury. At the time, Deontay Wilder was considered to be a big favorite to win the fight. At the time, Tyson Fury, a lot of people dismissed him as a top 10 opponent because Tyson Fury just came back from fighting mental depression, being severely overweight, having suicidal thoughts, cocaine problems, and a lot of other issues that he was having at the time. The boxing public considered that an easy fight for Deontay Wilder, but also a marketable fight that would help him become a bigger draw in the future negotiations with Anthony Joshua. But Tyson Fury, being Tyson Fury, he rose to the occasion, surprised everybody, completely outboxed Deontay Wilder for most of the fight. He was clipped in the 9th round, knocked down. He got up, proceeded to beat up Deontay Wilder, but Deontay Wilder landed his money shot in the last round. It looked like Tyson Fury was knocked out, but Tyson Fury got up, proceeded to beat up Deontay Wilder for the remaining of the fight, and everybody thought that Tyson Fury has just dethroned the WBC heavyweight champion. Obviously, Deontay Wilder managed to escape with a gift draw at that time. And then, obviously, the rematch was the fight that everybody wanted to see. Each fighter took a few interim fights in the meantime. Deontay Wilder, he knocked out Dominic Breazeale in the 1st round. And then he gave Luis Ortiz a rematch, got outboxed for the 7th rounds again, and once again prevailed with his power. He basically one punch knocked out Luis Ortiz in the 7th round. And Tyson Fury defeated Tom Schwartz and Otto Wallin in the meantime, and everything was ready for the highly anticipated rematch in February 2020. Deontay Wilder was favored to win the fight, although he was a slight favorite to win the fight. But this time, Tyson Fury, he promised to not leave it to the judges. He promised to knock Deontay Wilder out. At the time, nobody really believed him. Deontay Wilder didn't believe him, first of all. He was saying that Tyson Fury was just saying that and would actually try to run and survive for the 12 rounds like he did in the first time, in Deontay Wilder's words, of course. But Tyson Fury, he changed trainers. He came ready, and he exposed Wilder's lack of fundamental boxing skills in the rematch. He took the fight to Wilder. Wilder was shook. He didn't know what to do. He basically froze. He was beat up round after round after round. He was knocked down 2 times, 3 times actually, but the referee called only 2 knockdowns. And Deontay Wilder's corner, they threw the towel, and Tyson Fury became the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world. So Deontay Wilder, now defeated for the first time in his career, he made 10 successful title defenses of his WBC belt. He was the WBC heavyweight world champion for about 5 years, and to be honest, his resume is not impressive. It's not impressive at all, especially if we take into account that he actually had an opportunity to unify multiple times. He had the opportunity to fight better opposition multiple times, but he always chose to go to the ultimate path of least resistance. He had an opportunity to fight Vladimir Klitschko in the undisputed unification, but I remember Wilder's words at the time. He was in the driver's seat, that's what he claimed. He had the belt that everybody else wanted, the WBC belt, so therefore he fought not Vladimir Klitschko but Eric Molina and fighters of that caliber. Absolutely unacceptable for a world heavyweight champion, for somebody that holds a world heavyweight title, but that's what Wilder done. Also, he was supposed to fight Alexander Povetkin. That fight didn't happen because of the melodium issues. Povetkin tested positive for that drug, so obviously it can't be Deontay Wilder's fault. So obviously Alexander Povetkin is the only guy to blame for that fight falling through. But after that, Deontay Wilder, he had an opportunity to fight Anthony Joshua multiple times. He was offered more money than he had ever earned in his career. He proceeded to claim that it was actually Anthony Joshua ducking him. He turned out multiple deals offered by Anthony Joshua, by Eddie Hearn, and proceeded to go his own way, fighting lesser competition. Also, he had Dillian Whyte as the #1 contender for about 2 years, didn't fight him. Instead, he opted to fight guys that were not top 10, that were not top 15 at the time when Dillian Whyte was a pay-per-view attraction in the UK. So I don't really know if he was worried about losing to Dillian Whyte, or the animosity between the two was so big that Deontay Wilder didn't want to give him an opportunity to fight for the world championship. Either way, he failed to fight Dillian Whyte, who was top 5 fighter at the time, who was big money fight, who was pay-per-view attraction in the UK. Deontay Wilder, he chose to fight on a lesser stage for lesser money against lesser opposition and ultimately lesser recognition. And ultimately he fought Tyson Fury at the time that everybody thought it was the perfect time to fight Tyson Fury, a guy coming from depression, a guy coming for a big layoff, drug problems, weight problems, and whatnot. But Deontay Wilder, he didn't succeed. First, he only managed to get a gift draw against Tyson Fury, and in the rematch he got knocked out. So definitely not an impressive resume for Deontay Wilder, especially considering the fact that he held a portion of the heavyweight title for 5 years and made 10 title defenses. This was Inside the Resume by SPORTZ Insider.